So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next panel on the European elections, the electoral outcomes and its implications. We have put together a very interesting panel with a number of high-ranked experts in this particular area. A newly re-elected MEP from Hungary, Ilke Győri, member of the European Parliament. You got re-elected now. You have been serving in the past in the Econ Committee and also being a substitute in the Inter Committee and in the delegation to Central America. Before, you have been actually State Secretary for European Affairs, amongst others in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also Hungarian's ambassador to Spain. Thank you very much for being with us here. We have András, now from being the head of the department and senior research fellow here, Center for Social Affairs at the Institute for Social Political Science. We will actually start shortly with you after the short introduction. We have with us Ilke Toygür, director of the Global Policy Center and also TEPSA board member with us, and Erik Jones, director of the Robert Schuman Center of Advanced Studies at the European Institute, European University Institute in Florence. And my name is Michael Gieding, and I'm happy to be today's chairman here, guiding you through this panel on obviously a very timely topic. So actually coordinating this panel was a little bit of a tiny challenge since we didn't really know what would happen until the very last moment. And since we are now gathered here in Budapest, coming from all over Europe, I thought, and we thought, the organizers thought it would be nice to start actually with the first input to give all the very European crowd a perspective of what actually happened during the European Parliament elections, specifically with a Hungarian perspective. So we will start with the Hungarian perspective, and then we will end in the machinery, so to say, in the European Parliament, then with you. And in between, we will have interventions by Ilke, focusing specifically then on the impact of the electoral outcome and on the institutional setup, policies moving forward. And with Erik Jones, more than looking a little bit on how the European elections and the political elections and the political decisions they engendered are going to affect politics in countries such as Italy and France. And we will take it up from there then to move into the European Parliament. So without further ado, I would give you the floor, 10 minutes to András, and then we go one after the next. And we will then have plenty of time for an exciting exchange. That's the purpose. We will have short intros of 10 minutes and then sufficient time, more than 40 minutes. That's the plan, to bring you in and also your experiences, to challenge them a little bit with what we have been and will be listening to here now. András, the floor is for yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and also to the invitation to this prestigious panel. What I will speak about is how the European elections went in Hungary and what are the implications of the Hungarian results to European politics in general and also to Fidesz's place in Europe. On June 9th, there wasn't only European elections in Hungary, but it was the first time ever in Hungarian history, a dual elections, which meant that we had both local elections and European elections on the same day. And while during the local elections, the balance of power in Hungary didn't change substantially. Actually, it basically brought the repeat of the results of the 2019 local elections. At the same time, at the European elections, we saw a radical realignment of the Hungarian party system. And it's not because of the result of Fidesz, which is low by previous Fidesz standards, but it's because there is a new opposition challenger in Hungarian politics who completely transformed opposition politics in Hungary, and he did it in only 2 or 3 months' time. So in a very this is a very sudden development in Hungarian politics. We had record turnout of 59%. It went up from 43% last time, which was already the record turnout for European elections in Hungary. This shows two things. First, it shows that bringing together local elections and European elections clearly is driving up turnout, especially in the countryside, especially in rural Hungary, where people tend not to vote at the European elections, but they normally vote at the local elections. And also because of this radical realignment that just took place over the last few months, it caused some excitedness in Hungarian politics, and this also contributed to this record turnout of 59%. And Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party secured a win, but only with 45% of the votes. You might ask me, yeah. So what I would like to, of course, emphasize is that most political parties in the European Union would be more than happy with 45% of the votes. And you may hear from the government communication that also Fidesz gained the most votes for Fidesz at the European elections, which is more than 2 million votes. But this is thanks to the record turnout, of course. So on the other side, we could also argue that never in the history of European elections so many people voted against Fidesz. It's also true, because we had record turnout. So this 45% should be interpreted in the context of where Fidesz is coming from. So not from the European perspective in this respect, but from the local context. And the local context is that two years ago, at the general elections, Fidesz gained 52% of the votes casted in Hungary proper. And if you add the ethnic Hungarian votes, it was 54% of the votes. So Fidesz is down at least by 8%, but rather 10% compared to the general elections which took place 2 years ago. Compared to the European elections 5 years ago, it's also down by approximately 8 points, which resulted in 11 seats for Fidesz at the European Parliament instead of the 13 seats which they had in the previous term. So at the European level, what you can see is that the Fidesz delegation has to sell a result which is worse than last time as a success. But out of these elections, I think the most important thing for the Hungarian audience was not how Fidesz was doing, because it was kind of expected that they would do worse than 2 years ago, because we have had an economic crisis with record high inflation during the last year. We also had here in Hungary a major scandal rocking the country in February, which resulted in the resignation of Hungary's president and also the Spitzenkandidat of Fidesz for the European elections. So it was a major crisis, and we are actually still in the aftermath of that crisis, because the political newcomer who rocked Hungarian politics is the former husband of this Spitzenkandidat who had to resign. So actually, out of the 11 parties who contested the European elections in Hungary, the newly established Respect and Freedom Party, which is called in Hungarian TEPSA, this TEPSA party emerged as a significant player. Despite being a newcomer in Hungarian politics, this party was just established 2 months ago, and its leader, Péter Magyar, appeared on the Hungarian scene just 1 day after the resignation of the former wife, on the 11th of February. So this guy, with his new party, gained 30% of the votes in 3 months' time. This is highly unusual in Hungarian politics. What I would like to really emphasize to you is that in Hungarian politics, the party system is quite stable. We have never had early elections, for example, in the last 34 years since democracy is back to Hungary. So normally what is representative of the Hungarian system is that it's pretty stable, and it's very, very difficult to enter to the political scene for a new political party. It doesn't happen all the time. And we have never seen anything like that a new party comes and it reaches 30% in 2 months' time. With this 30% support, TEPSA party gained 7 seats. And why is it important at the European level? Because after 3 years, when the European People's Party didn't have a proper Hungarian delegation, they had one Hungarian MEP from the Christian Democratic Party who stayed there. This is a coalition partner of the Fidesz party, by the way. But otherwise, Fidesz left, of course, 3 years ago from the European People's Party, and TISA will emerge as the new EPP member. The best proof for that is that Manfred Weber is coming to Budapest tomorrow to negotiate with Péter Magyar, the leader of the Fidesz, leader of the TISA party. Some other opposition politicians call it the new Fidesz, by the way. But the point is that Manfred Weber is more than open to welcome Péter Magyar and the TISA party in the European People's Party. So there will be a sizable delegation in the EPP again from Hungary, while at the same time Fidesz will be aiming to find a political group on the radical right. It will be either ECR or the Identity and Democracy political group. I think what I should still explain in just 1 minute is that this new phenomenon that we have a political newcomer who rocked Hungarian politics in 3 months is illustrative of a deeper crisis in Hungarian politics. And this deeper crisis is not only reflecting some disappointment with the Orbán regime, which is clear from the result that they are down 10 points in 2 years' time. They are still solid, as I mentioned, so it's still a good result by European standards, but relatively speaking, they are down 10 points. But this phenomenon is not only about Fidesz, but rather and mostly it's about the weakness and the disillusionment, the complete disillusionment with the established opposition in Hungary. And what happened is that the Hungarian established opposition has been almost completely wiped out from the scene. A good example for that is that in the European Parliament, the Liberal Momentum Party, who had 2 MEPs, and they gained 10% last time at the European elections, they didn't even manage to get into the European Parliament, and they lost both of their seats. So Renew Europe group will be without Hungarian MEPs this time. And the SND group, which had 5 MEPs from Hungary in the previous term, 4 of them coming from the Democratic Coalition Party, and 1 of them was from the Hungarian Socialist Party, it's down from 5 to 2. Because instead of 22%, which Social Democratic parties gained at the last European elections, now their united result was 8%, which was only enough for 2 people. So altogether, what I would argue is that the complete political newcomer destroyed basically the existing Hungarian, previously existing Hungarian opposition, and it shows that the opposition voters are craving for something new, are really want to believe in something new, that change is possible in this country, and they just went for anybody new who could potentially mount a serious challenge against the Orbán regime. And on the European scene and the European ambitions of Orbán, I would like to say a few words. During the campaign, the official slogan was "Occupy Brussels." So the big plan was, and in 1 minute I will argue that the occupation of Brussels failed. Not only because Fidesz fell in the polls, but mostly because the breakthrough of the radical right didn't happen at the European scene. The radical right became somewhat stronger, but by the way, the EPP also got stronger. So it's true that it's a more right-wing European Parliament than previously, but the center alliance, the Grand Coalition, still holds. The SND, the EPP, and the Liberals all together have a majority of around 400 MEPs in the European Parliament. The big hope of Orbán is actually to convince the European People's Party to move to the right instead of building alliances in the center. So when he speaks about occupying Brussels, it doesn't only mean that the radical right should join forces and should be stronger than before, but it also implies the move of the center right towards the radical right. And my expectation, based on the results, based on the fact that the center will hold in the European Parliament, is that the Grand Coalition that was running the European Parliament and which has occupied all the major positions in European politics will still hold and will still dominate European politics in the next 5 years as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, András. You had the chance to kick off the panel on the European Parliament's implications. Now, first of all, for us Europeans here coming to Budapest to understand the Hungarian results and its implications for Hungary and the European Union. And please be reminded of a few figures. It was 60% voter turnout, which is way beyond the average in the European Union. It was the biggest increase of plus 15%. Together with other EU member states here, just a gentle reminder, also in Cyprus and Slovenia and the Slovak Republic, those were the four where massive increases in voter turnout were witnessed. And but still less than in the last parliamentary national elections. Also something to be reminded of. Also here with the 60%, it was still minus 10% in comparison to the last national elections. And currently the provisional results for Hungary are 10 for the non-attached, since we do not know about the future, and we will see something that was elaborated upon. Currently 8 if Weber's visit will be a success from Weber's point of view, 8 then for the EPP, 2 for the SND and 1 for the others. So the provisional results for the time being. And with this, we hand over now to Ilke, because Ilke is now elaborating on the impact of those electoral outcomes, more broadly speaking, on the institutional setup. I'm very much looking forward to your input. 10 minutes also for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. For me, the highlight of this trip is that learning the biggest party system changes Hungary is happening because of a broken love affair. I think this is the fun part of this trip. If we come back to the results and possible impacts on the institutional setup and policy, actually, I wanna structure my intervention in 3 parts. The first one is the results and what have been important for me. Trying to understand these results, including the top job gossip. I just came from Brussels. I was 1 week in Brussels, so I'm really done with the gossip part. The second one is my interpretation of possible policy implications of these results. And I want to end on commenting on mostly putting out questions about the impact of European Parliament elections on the future of Europe debate. So the results, as we have known, we should underline that there was not necessarily a surge of the right wing, but the steady rise continued. I think this shouldn't be less alarming for us. We shouldn't end up saying that this is not that bad, but we should definitely enter into a mood of analyzing country by country, case by case. Because we have certainly different situations in different member states. Clearly, we have our attention on Germany and France, especially France. No, it's like at 9 p.m., right after the announcement of the provisional results, we had President Macron's announcement, and it was like a bomb in European conversations. So these 2 countries definitely require special attention, but also some kind of positive cases. I want to name Spain and Portugal, for example, that has done, mainstream political parties have done way better than expected and better than the polls have said. We already know that the Greens and the Liberals have lost votes, but EPP has performed well, and Socialists and Democrats kind of stayed. So we have now a grand coalition of 403 MEPs out of 720, and together with the Greens, 456. Why I mentioned the name Greens here is quite important, because the Socialists underlined over and over that their support for von der Leyen relies on, if there's a necessity for looking for more MEPs beyond the grand coalition, that look should be towards the Greens. And this time they are trying to push something very interesting. At least I find something interesting. They don't want to make this just for von der Leyen's appointment. They actively ask for something like a coalition agreement. So some kind of common principles that can guide the legislation moving forward. So we are in front of a situation where the Ursula von der Leyen would need QMV vote in the European Council to get the candidacy, and then an absolute majority in the Parliament. What I think right now is that, well, there might always be surprises, no? But we are at a moment of responsible decision making on top jobs, because there are more and more consensus on Ursula von der Leyen getting the European Commission presidency. Antonio Costa is now the formal candidate for the S&D. We have Metzola's name as continuation, and Kaja Kallas for the High Representative VP role. So I really want to ask, and I wanted to put this on the table, that we might be in a point of kind of a responsible consensus. But yeah, again, I can be proven wrong. If that's the case, don't quote me on this, because you never know what happens in these negotiations. It's the people that are in the room that negotiate the names after all. The second point that I wanted to make is on policy priorities, because even if this is a right-wing rise, not a right-wing surge, there will be, in my personal stance, there will be changes in the landscape, policy landscape. Clearly, this is all happening in all this geopolitical changes that we are facing, including Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and Donald Trump's potential comeback. We are seeing, I think there's a common understanding on the policy priorities of the European Union: security and defense, competitiveness, and enlargement being three of them, in my personal opinion. But there are some policy questions that are still out there that might really be impacted by the changes in the structure of the European Parliament. Clearly, it's no secret. The first one is the future of the Green Deal. There is a common worry that the Green Deal went too far, and there might be issues related to its implementation, because legislation is already there. The legislation of the Green Deal is already there. The question will be on implementation and financing. And I think the clever trick to kind of safeguard the Green Deal would be twofolded. The first one is keeping the Greens as close as possible, push them to be constructive. And secondly, connect Green Deal to competitiveness, the reform of the single market conversation as much as possible. Not take the conversation just from the fight against climate change point of view, but explaining both the citizens and the political elites better why the European Union should spend political capital and resources on the Green Deal. So we can, of course, see procrastination, inaction, and more discussions about the cost of the Green Deal and who will pay for it, which are, by the way, in my opinion, very legitimate questions, even if I wholeheartedly support the green transition and the need to transition. I think these conversations will be more and more tough, both at the discourse level in the European Parliament and at the legislation level, because the conversations about legislation, one word in, one word out, we have a practitioner here, so she would know way better than I do, is the more juicy part where the political groups and parties play their hands. No, it's like their discourses and the language of the legislation. The second policy that I want to mention, and then I'm going to go to my third block, is security, defense, and enlargement. And clearly, we can see that with the rise of the right wing, we can see that Ukraine's economic integration, not just membership, but economic integration in the meantime could become more controversial. Far-right parties could often oppose providing Ukraine more financial assistance and give more access to single market while waiting for the membership. Of course, this will all very much also depend on what I call the second round of European Parliament elections, the US presidential elections in November. Because depending on if Donald Trump comes back or if we have some kind of continuation in the White House, the feeling of responsibility from the European side, looking at the Ukrainian case, could definitely change. One more remark that I wanted to make in this realm is that EU enlargement could become even more challenging with a right-wing rise. The reason for that is that there is a common understanding that the reform conversation should continue at the same time of enlargement, because this was also kind of the agreement in Granada. No, it's like the enlargement conversation and the reform conversation go hand in hand. But the surge of the far right will scare very much the possibility of big reform discussions, because governments, especially treaty change, not that there's an appetite for treaty change, I'm not claiming that, but the national governments will be more and more scared because these questions could go to referendums in the member states, and this will become more of a toxic conversation with the rise of the far right. I think when it comes to security and defense, there is a common understanding that the European Union should game up, and I personally think that this is going to be kind of an easier area, and it's already a more right-wing agenda anyway. I have 1 minute and 2 main comments then on the future of Europe conversation. The far right's rising vote share definitely reflects dissatisfaction with mainstream politics. Not that we could say this in every country, that I want to underline Spain, for example, that mainstream parties did better than the right-wing alternative. But this is definitely why we should open up a more elaborate conversation. This is not necessarily the time that we can just like relax now. It's not that bad and it's going to be okay. But it's time to reflect for the political scientists and analysts that there's a need to have a broader conversation of what is going wrong in the national level, what is going on in the European level, and the link between national politics and the European politics, and how citizens' preferences should be better reflected at the European level. And last but not least, then I hope you will ask me many questions about the future of Europe debate, is that the economic and financial conversation that we should start having next year. It's like we have the review of MFF, but we also will soon start the conversation about the next multi-annual financial framework. And there we will really dig in to the preferences of citizens, preferences of political parties, European Union's policy priorities as a whole, which is going to be a very bloody debate, and how to finance it. So we should always keep in mind the results of the elections, the current situation about democracy, and the situation related to mainstream politics in Europe, and how this will have an impact next year when we are discussing about priorities and how to finance them. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just as an additional information, so what is happening now in the next couple of weeks, we all know in the European Parliament, they have to prepare to make this institution become operational, and they will have then on the 16th of July, I think, then the constitutive meeting where they will basically constitute the next legislative term. And then on the 18th of July, that's the fixed date for the time being, the very likely then election of the future Commission president. Mm-hmm. That's at least the idea for the time being. And with regard to the policy agenda, we were just a gentle reminder also here that we also have all the unfinished business, or those that actually the three institutions could agree upon in the letter, 122 legislative files that we will actually be moving to the next legislative term. So there is immediate legislative action to be expected, and not only the strategic thinking behind. And that brings me then to the next speaker, Erik Jones. You promised us to go a little bit beyond the classical implications we started to elaborate upon, but also to actually elaborate on something very important we tend to forget about. Actually, on the one hand, the effects potentially also on the financial market and the ECB as one thing, and also the political implications in the respective national member states, such as France or Italy, your chosen home. Please, the floor is yours.
No, thank you, Michael. I'm conscious this microphone actually amplifies a lot more than that one, and I have a professional deformity that I shout all day long. So if it's too loud, let me know, and I'll speak a little bit more softly. I want to talk about three things. One, I'm just going to nerd out a little bit on what's going to happen in the European Central Bank and in the bond markets as a result of these elections, because it's not something I think many people have thought about a whole lot, and I thought you might get a takeaway from that. The other, I want to talk a little bit about what this is doing to our political culture more generally, because I think there are challenges that emerge from these elections that people have not appreciated to the extent to which they deserve to be addressed. And then the third thing, given my accent, and the fact that everybody keeps talking about Donald Trump, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this is going to play out in the context of the transatlantic relationship, because believe it or not, Americans actually paid attention to these European elections, and having paid attention, they may never pay attention to Europe again. And I need to explain why that might be the case. But let's start with the bond markets. Now, nobody I know, and I work a lot with hedge fund managers trying to help them prepare the bets that they're going to make against European sovereign debt instruments. Nobody really talked about these European parliamentary elections in any big terms until Emmanuel Macron decided to dissolve the French parliament, at which point everybody started looking at French sovereign debt instruments and began asking whether this is a good time to lay on a short position. And the problem is if they lay on shorts on French sovereign debt, which, by the way, the spread against Germany increased by 10 basis points or 0.1 of 1% almost instantly. When they start laying on shorts on French sovereign debt, they're going to move to Italy as well. And then they're going to wake up in about a week's time to newspaper headlines that indicate that both countries have just gone into excessive deficit procedures. And they're going to look at both countries as they struggle to meet the financial requirements under the new macroeconomic governance framework. And those bets are just going to get worse and worse over the summer, which is not good because the bond markets get thinner and thinner as we go into August, which means that the pressure becomes harder to manage. Now, the reason that this is important for you to know is because the European Central Bank decided at the end of June that it would stop using reinvesting the maturing principal on the pandemic emergency purchase program. By the way, I did tell you I was going to nerd out here. And yet it was that reinvestment of maturing principal that is the first line of defense that the ECB had in stabilizing sovereign debt markets. And so without having that liquidity available, the ECB is left with its second line of defense, which is called the transmission protection instrument. And unfortunately, we don't really know how that's supposed to work, or whether the governing council is actually capable of deploying it. And if the governing council is found wanting, then we could be facing a full-blown sovereign debt crisis at the end of the summer, and the only instrument left available to the governing council will be outright monetary transactions, which they've never used, and we're not sure how they'll use either, right? Now, all of this is important because nobody has this on their radar, and the end result could be a radical change in the way the ECB has to do policy at a time when it's already trying very desperately to tighten into a soft landing. And none of that was expected in advance. So these could turn out to be some of the most consequential European parliamentary elections ever for reasons that have very little to do with European politics. I hope that's not going to be the case, but I want to throw that out there just for your consideration as a possibility. Now, at the same time, these things are consequential in the way we think about politics in Europe. You see, we have been talking, and we are used to talking in an idiom of the mainstream and the extremes, right? Where we say, oh, these are the extremist parties, these are the mainstream parties. The extremist parties are really dangerous and scary. The mainstream parties are not, right? And the issue now is that the parties that we have been labeling extreme for a long time are now becoming so important politically that the mainstream parties have to look at them and make a decision. And the decision they have to make is, do I want to talk about these parties as though they are now part of the mainstream? Right? That's a kind of a normalization that we have been trained from the end of the Second World War to avoid, right? We have been trained not to normalize extremist parties rhetorically. At the same time, the politicians working in these extremist parties, or formerly labeled extremist parties, are looking around and saying, hey, I actually have the chance to govern. And if I'm going to govern, I should probably move to the center to keep as many of the people on board as possible. So we've got the extremist parties, they're normalizing some, if not many, of their positions. And we've got the mainstream parties that are normalizing some, if not much, of their rhetoric about the extremes. This is very hard to manage politically. Just look what happened to the Republican Party in France. Erik decided that he would form a deal with the Rassemblement National, and his whole party turned against him, right? And feasted on him like piranhas in some Amazonian river basin. And this is an issue that we're going to face time and again. The EPP is having a big debate about whether the VVD should be kept in, because Mark Rutte's party has decided to go into coalition with the PVV, right? Which, by the way, is an offshoot of the VVD originally. It's not like this guy Geert Wilders came from nowhere. He was a VVD politician before he broke away and formed this new political movement. And the difficulty we have in this context is that none of our ability to form coalitions is prepared for it. And this parliamentary election has revealed that in its extreme. So when Ilke talked about how the S&D was saying you can't do any kind of a deal with the ECR, what they're really saying is you can't do any kind of a deal with Giorgia Meloni, who is the sort of poster child of an extremist politician who's decided to normalize many of her positions so that she could retain political control in Italy. And look at her coalition. Her coalition partners have all lost support. Her Brothers of Italy, which was the most extremist party that we had, right, is now the largest political movement in Italy. Okay? So you see what I'm talking about. What these European elections have revealed to us is something fundamentally transformative about what it means to be extreme and what it means to be mainstream. And it's going to be very disconcerting for many people to deal with that very simple fact, including in the United States. Because in the United States, Giorgia Meloni is not the poster child of the normalized right-wing extremist. She's a poster child of responsible government. I mean, I can't tell you she is more popular in Washington than Matteo Renzi ever was. And that's very hard for Americans to look across at Europe and to hear all of this conversation about you guys moving to the far right when we're dealing with a political situation that's radically different from the one that you're dealing with. And in that context, much of what are called extremist parties in Europe are actually lionized by the right-wing Republican Party in the United States, right? So they don't see anything discomforting about what's going on. What they do see as discomforting is the fact that the German coalition government got fewer than 31% of the vote and looks very weak. The French government has just dissolved. The British government has just dissolved. And the only large country that seems to be holding itself together is run by Giorgia Meloni, who half of the Europeans are afraid to do business with. So from the transatlantic perspective, this is a very...
I was going to say that, yeah.
I mean, but from the transatlantic perspective, this is a very disconcerting and confusing situation. And here's the good news for you guys. If Donald Trump wins, he has a 970-page project that his team wants to introduce, right, which is called Project 2025. It has precisely 4 paragraphs on Europe. The first paragraph says, this is the section on Europe, right? The second paragraph says, we need to do some kind of deal with the United Kingdom before it gets sucked into the European context, right? The third paragraph says the Europeans need to do more for their own security, right? And the fourth paragraph says they need to spend more on their own defense, right? And that's it. That's all they care about with you guys. So the biggest enemy that you have dealing with the Trump administration, I hate to say it, is going to be yourselves. Because at the end of the day, what is most likely to happen if Donald Trump gets elected is every European head of state or government is going to beeline it to Washington in order to try to figure out how to become the privileged partner of this new administration in the United States. And they are going to use that opportunity to divide Europe in order to get better terms of trade, right? in industrial policy, right? That is their whole mission in life, is to have a transactional relationship across the Atlantic. And I think that would be very bad for European integration and European security. If the Biden administration comes back, I think things will be easier. But let's face it, they haven't been all that easy over the past 4 years. And Europe will need to be united, which means it's going to have to accept this transformative political environment, manage this very, or at least potentially hostile financial environment, and deal with all the issues that Ilke raised in her presentation before me. So I think it's going to be a challenging period coming ahead, and I'm very interested and curious to see how we can manage it without too much disruption. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You see, we promised to make it an exciting panel, and it's, the room temperature is heating up every minute. And with this, I hand over now to the newly elected and old member of the European Parliament, Toygür. I'm very pleased to have you here on the panel and to reflect on your way interpreting the results and maybe already starting responding to some of the interventions you heard. And maybe you share with us to which party group Fidesz will belong. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really pleased to meet you, and I'm very pleased that you all came over on the occasion of the forthcoming Hungarian presidency. Actually, Erik has saved a lot of time to me, speaking to you about the new normality and whether the EU is ready to accept a kind of new normality and to have a kind of redefinition about extremism and extreme players, because according to the present Brussels narrative, I'm an extremely dangerous extremist. So you will see from my intervention that I'm really, really frightening. So let me start by making some references to what we have been said on how the Hungarian case was presented to you on. Of course, I will not have different views on the figures, but maybe a different view on the interpretation of the figures. Because actually it was kind of funny for me how the international press is interpreting the Hungarian results, because Fidesz won these elections with the highest score in the continent. You can compare saying that, yes, it's less than last time, but having a completely changed political scene, I still think it's a very good result. And I don't think there is any party in Europe which would not subscribe that result as having the highest percentage. Of course, there is a completely changed landscape, and we still need time to evaluate this. And there are new players, and we know very little about this new player, which will have a strong representation in the European Parliament. I'm not sure whether it will be EPP, so don't take it as a matter of fact, because we are at a very early stage to say that. And Manfred Weber comes here, and of course, I'm looking forward to this kind of conversations. But let me just mention some issues concerning both players. And the guy who is leading this new party, he's the only one we know. You have to know that all the other candidates were recruited by internet to this party. So it's a one-member, one-player party. Nobody else ever said a word in the media because it's a one-man show. There is no political orientation. There are no values we know they are sharing or they are important for them. So it's a complete enigma what they represent. Nobody has ever said that. Nobody have ever prepared a document on that. I would rather call this formation a kind of revenge party. The personal aspect of this revenge has been already mentioned by Ilke. It was like a soap opera, a very sad soap opera with very serious consequences. But actually, for me, it's very sad. And it's a strong signal that in Hungary, a person who was taping the wife under the kitchen table, it's a fact, can gain the confidence of 30,000 or 30 percentage of the votes. It's frightening me. It means a high discontent with the ruling party. That's for sure. So, but this message has to be analyzed. But for me, it's a fright. That's a real frightening. To vote in favor of someone, the only thing we know about him, that he taped the wife under the kitchen table. And just a few words on Mr. Weber. Actually, I will just mention certain facts because his moves are really remarkable. In 2019, he said that I want to be elected. He was the chief Spitzencandidate of EPP. I want to be elected from the center. And then he's asked at the end of April in an interview whether he wants to be elected with the votes of Fidesz. And he said, no, I don't want to be elected with the votes of Fidesz. And then to his great surprise, after that, he was not getting the votes of Fidesz party, I mean by Prime Minister Orbán, in the European Council. And for him, it was a big moment of getting truly offended. And I don't think he has recovered from that offense. So when I speak about a kind of double revenge phenomenon, it's not just to Mr. Magyar, but it's also for Mr. Weber. And then just in a timely manner, in 2026, what does Mr. Weber say? And it's about the future orientations of EPP and what will be cooked in the witch kitchen in Brussels. He said, no, we have to change the Brussels Ample coalition. We have to send away the socialists, the Greens, and the liberals, and we have to open towards the conservatives. I'm quoting him. And what do we see now? On the 10th of June, well, EPP starts negotiating with the ancien regime, with the socialists, the liberals, and the Greens at Secretary General levels and all other levels, I suppose. And even Politico says that voters' call for mutiny only seems to make an institutional power structure more entrenched. The weekend elections were totally irrelevant or will be totally irrelevant in the process. And I find this frightening because, of course, there was an official narrative of these elections. What is at stake? What is at stake is that extremists will take over Brussels and we have a real danger. Anti-European forces will get much stronger at these elections. Well, I think there is a move, but Erik was really describing it. It's not just the percentage. You can say just a few more mandates for ECR or for ID. But let me just mention two things. The first one, we have 101 members, of whom we have no idea yet where they will join. I'm not speaking only about the non-attached, but I'm speaking about another group, which is called now Others. The new parties, of which nobody knows their party affiliation and tendencies. So we will see what happens to them, which group to change. And having 101 MEPs without knowing where they will go, that can make a change. That can make a, I wouldn't say that. We will see. They are nowhere. They are either non-attached or they are others. And we don't know yet for sure. We have some certain suspicions, but we don't know yet for sure where they will join. And the other thing, don't agree with this new narrative that there was not a landslide victory for the right, but is happening, and you are very rightly saying it, in the three big countries. So Meloni consolidates power. In Germany, that's actually, I mean, I found amazing, that map having the Eastern and Western Germany showing who won in those areas. And it's actually Eastern Germany. CDU was beaten by 7% by AfD. So there is a problem in Germany from the coalition point of view. Meanwhile, we know that AfD had enormous scandals. They were making incredible mistakes. The entire media was on them, and still they achieved this result. And France was already deeply discussed, so I will not go into details. We will see whether the move by Macron was, from his point of view, an intelligent one or not. But we know that actually he just halved his representation, and Le Pen is stronger than ever. So the problem will be, and that's why my main message, that if things go on, that there are extremely important new phenomena, there is extremely clear move that was enough. And comparing surveys before the elections, which are the most important issues for citizens, it was clear that citizens' views and preoccupations were not coinciding with the moves by the Brussels elite. And all those pieces of legislations we were working on in the last 5 mandates. So the extremely strong push for the Green Deal, everything an ideology-based economic policy, all these rule of law issues, all these ideological debates were not really coinciding with the priorities of the people. So what I really wouldn't like to see, that after the elections, we have the ancien regime back and neglects the mood of the people, their preferences, because the gap will be wider. And I think that's dangerous. Not that the so-called extremist parties, or I would say right-wing parties, but get stronger, but if we have this gap stronger, then that will be Europe's problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, with you in the room representing many more than 27 member states, all the TEPSA members and associate members with all your various national luggages carrying around, I'm more than happy to invite you to bring in your experiences and your thoughts about the implications of European elections and to address them, to compare them, to challenge them with those we have been just hearing here on the panel. And I see there is already a first question. Paul, please. Do we have mics?
Paul, there's a mic right there.
Yes, thank you.
I would just take it. Yes, Paul Schmidt from the Society for European Politics and all TEPSA board member. Thank you all very much. Very emotional, very interesting. 2 comments or 3 comments. On the rule of law, I don't agree because there's a broad consensus on this. On non-affiliated and new members, yes, I agree. That's an interesting situation at which we're at the moment. But keep in mind that I think around approximately 40 MEPs were non-affiliated, more or less, during the last legislative period. But that still leaves you with around 60 members that still have to look for their political parties, more or less. But we'll see. It's just my guess. A particular thank to Ilke and Erik for their provocative, thought-provoking statements. And I think... Oh, hello? Yes, now it works. Whenever I want to say something critical, it turns off. No, yes, I have to be quick. Work the battery, probably. I share many of the things that you've said, but maybe as for the sake of the discussion, I would argue with you that I think regarding the reading of the election results, and if you talk about the rise of the far right or the political disruption, I think one has to be careful because I think as we look at the turnout, and we have 51% more or less of EU-wide turnout, the room for jumping to valid conclusions is probably not too big. And if we talk about the rise of the far right all the time, it can also become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. If we look at the composition of the European Parliament, Ilke has mentioned it, there's no room for that interpretation. You look at this at the single member state level, you have different patterns. Actually, you have a strong anti-government vote, okay, with different results. In the Nordic countries, different results, but also Hungary was mentioned, Germany, the French case, Austria, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Then you have countries where the governments did pretty well, like in Spain, Poland, or Italy. But if you look at Germany, for example, you can also, we always look at how the Alternative for Germany performs, but we can also say that 84% of the people turning up for the elections voted for a different party. If you look at the Austrian case, you can always argue, of course, that the FPÖ, the far-right party, has gained the election, but you can also say that 76% of the people who voted for parties which are more or less pro-integration and have a constructive approach to European integration. And my last sentence, if you look at the composition of the European Parliament, you have 65% of the seats for constructive political parties, where you have, while on the other hand, 18% which want more or less block legislation. So what we have to watch is the national political dynamics, and once we see how this materializes in the national elections, then we can draw, I think, the right conclusions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I knew why I wanted to reserve 45 minutes for the Q&A session. Now, let's see. Let's continue and bring in others. And I would suggest that we collect as many input as possible from the audience so that we can engage as much as possible.
Yes, thank you. Von der Tekin Institut für Europäische Politik, Berlin, and also TEPSA board member. I also wanted to touch a bit upon the issue of, well, the rise of the far right, and I think I buy the argument of the self-fulfilling prophecy. However, I think we also have to be careful with simply kind of calming ourselves and saying the majority is going to hold, because I think we really need to look into what that means. And Erik, you really touched upon an issue that I wanted to actually also ask before you were touching upon it, because that is the normalization of right-wing political content. And I think this is what we're going to see more increasingly. And I think for me, one policy area where we've already seen that over the past years, that's the migration policy. And we talked about it during the first panel, but I think here we really have to see, you know, how can we basically counteract that normalization thing. And the EPP, and this is what I just would be interested in your opinion, has now these so-called 3 criteria in order to identify those good right-wings and those bad right-wing parties with pro-European, pro-Ukraine, and pro-rule of law. I see, you know, maybe that's good, but I don't see how Meloni does actually fit in there. So I don't know, Erik, maybe you could kind of elaborate on that. And then just with in also broadening the picture with regards to the domestic political repercussions of the elections, I think we really have to look carefully into that. And then also thinking the European Parliament and the Council together. And I think if we do that, I think we even then also get a critical picture, because we know that Macron's going to be busy with his domestic repercussions. He might, with the cohabitation, be even then kind of blocked in the future. And one of the you know, leaders that has actually been reinforced by the elections is Meloni again. So what does that mean for then the normalization of right-wing policies?
Just for your information, Ms. Yuri, so we are moving from Vienna to Berlin and now continue with Ljubljana. Okay, if you allow us, we bring in.
Thank you very much. So I have 3 comments. The first is I'm going to use that one, the ancien regime issue. Regarding the issue how the top jobs are going to be delivered, the Eastern Europe or the Central and Eastern Europe are going to be more or less left out. So it is a sort of copy of the ancien regime. So I think this can be also a challenge for the future European administration, leaving out, let's say, half of the European Union. The second issue is, you said, Funda said something about the relationship between the domestic alliance and domestic elections together with the European elections. The case of Slovenia is totally different. Center-right is always winning in the Slovenian elections and almost never winning in the national elections. But you know, what is a question that should be done for me, not matter who's going to be in power in the European Union. We are debating about security, we are debating about national defense, we are debating about competitiveness, but people are angry because there's no solidarity, there's no helping, there's no social policies and everything else. So this can be maybe a challenge for the future government, and no commission, whether Ursula von der Leyen is going to stay there, this is not going to be the main topic there. So I think this can be a challenge regarding the other challenges that we are going to have regarding the geopolitical changes.
So we move from the University of Ljubljana to Barcelona. We go now to Spain, and here's CDOP representative.
Thank you very much. Héctor Sánchez Margalef, researcher from CDOP. Thanks for the presentations. I'm not an economist, so the question may not be completely correct, but on the TPI, understood that we've never used it before, but there's precedents of similar instruments that have worked in the past. I assume, if I'm assuming correctly. So what's the possibilities of seeing them being used, the TPI, I mean, considering that the economic mood has changed? So have we learned something from the pandemic on the next generation and all this, so that may facilitate the use of the TPI in the future if the things you were saying come to happen? Thank you.
Very much. And before we get to Jaap de Zwaan, our honorary board member, we make a little stop here. Please.
Yes, hello. So now we are in Denmark, Copenhagen. Thank you so much. It was very interesting to listen to you. My name is Uffe Hvidkjær, and I'm a founder of a citizen think tank. And my question is about citizen participation. So in this EU term conference on the future of Europe was very important. And my question is, how do you see citizen participation in the next term? I've been working on this conference on the future of Europe with a national follow-up with Denmark in the world, because Denmark has the EU presidency in the next trio, together with Poland and Cyprus. And we are also an elected member of UN Security Council. So it's very interesting to combine the European and global perspective. So that's why I've also launched a new global dialogue forum to promote international bonding and democracy. Thank you.
And from Copenhagen, we go straight to the Netherlands.
Thank you very much. Jaap de Zwaan, honorary board member, former Secretary General of TEPSA. I think there was one dimension who has not been touched upon. How did the younger generation express themselves? I think there is information available, whether their tendency was to vote for the left wing or the right wing, but I'm more particularly interested about the situation in Hungary. Is there information available how those who voted for the first time express themselves? And in light of that question, I'm also wondering, well, you differ from interpretation or whatsoever, but nevertheless, this Peter Magyar, I think he is a Eurosceptic and he's a populist as well. But is it nevertheless a beginning of an organization of an opposition movement in Hungary? But the most important issue is, what about the younger generation in Hungary?
And we go to Bucharest, Romania.
This is like Eurovision now. The capital.
From the European Institute of Romania. Partial answer to the question that has been raised before. It seems that we have
That's great. Thank you.
To Zagreb.
Thank you. I was glad to hear that you had a very good turnout at this European Parliament elections in Hungary, because you tied the local elections with the European elections. And I think, you know, mechanisms like this are a key. We had a national elections in Croatia in April. And we had a very good turnout, more than 60%. But the reason, probably the main reason why this was so, is because our president pronounced a non-working day for these elections, and this was Wednesday. So people couldn't, you know, link it to the weekends. And that's why people simply went to vote. Now, on these European elections, we had a terrible turnout, like 15%. The worst in Europe. And the part of the reason is probably that people are tired with politics, but also because, you know, it was Sunday. So, I mean, I think it would, in order to get better legitimacy, it's a key issue, either to pronounce non-working days for these elections, or to link them with national elections, because I think this is the only way. I just wanted to underline this. Thanks.
So we have three more. We are zooming now back to Brussels.
Hi, Eva Rivera from TEPSA Secretariat. Thank you for the interesting overview. I'm French, so deeply traumatized by this election. And I had a question maybe more for MEP Győri. I agree with your assessment that there is a lot of disappointment with Brussels elites and some of the policies being not aligned with like citizens' priorities, though I'm not sure the Green Deal was one of them. But during this campaign, I didn't hear a lot about what exactly was the other options, you know, so there was a lot of critiques of the elite of these policies, but I was wondering if maybe like you could tell us more about your party/group priorities for the next parliament, if the Green Deal current application is not good in your view, what do you want to push in the European Parliament? I know that migration is also a topic. It would be nice to have some clarity on that. Thanks.
And from TEPSA Brussels, we go straight to London.
Thank you very much. Two brief questions, if I may. I'm Brendan Donnelly from the Federal Trust. Ilke talked about defence and security policy, which he thought would not be affected by what move the right has taken place in European politics. Is that really so? Is it not the case that there are elements of the right in continental Europe in particular, more than in the United Kingdom, which are rather suspicious of the grounds for the argument Europe needs to do more in the way of defence relating to Russia? Those who do not see Russia as being quite the threat that others do, perhaps won't be as impressed by this argument that Europe needs to do more in the way of defence. It was true during the Cold War that the general split was left-right. Right wanted more military spending, left wanted less. But does that apply at the moment? And secondly, a brief question to Erik. When you talk about normalisation, isn't part of the story that public opinion has shifted a bit to the right throughout Europe on the whole over the past 5 years, and the European elections, because it's a quintessentially democratic election, reflect that?
Thank you. Very briefly about Sweden, which was one of the countries going in the other direction. The exit polls have revealed that the main reason why we were very happy about the results, the Sweden Democrats went down considerably. The sad reason was that, quite rightly, they thought that they didn't know too much about the European Union, so they simply did not go to vote. Of course, this is a good result for Europe, but it doesn't give us very much hope about the next national election, which we had initially hoped. The other thing about Sweden is that all parties are very critical towards Russia, from left to right. Everyone is on the same line when it comes to Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, which I think personally is a good thing. But I have a question to Ilke. You talked about the unanimity about a stronger Europe, and in Brussels, right? Everyone thought we need a stronger Europe. And I agree. I think this goes for the whole of Europe. But I think there are differences between different countries. And if I hear what the polls say, if I hear what the Swedish politicians say, they don't want to sever the contacts with United States totally. The Swedish prime minister calls himself a transatlanticist. And I don't think it has to do with trade. I think it has to do with security. And the other thing I wonder about what you heard in Brussels, is it that everyone is on the same line as Macron when he laid out his ideas? Because also among the Nordic countries, there is a strong feeling for free trade, which is not really Macron's main ideas. So how do you see the differences between different countries as they come out in Brussels?
All right, and we are about to finish the Q&A. But we
are losing track here, Michael. And thank you, Michael, for this most interactive panel that I ever see. Thank you. Non-EU citizen, Turkey. My name is Jana from Istanbul Policy Center. from Istanbul. Most of the discussion was around macro level and global level. So I'm happy that we get questions on micro level, how people think, because voters punish parties that we see. We see it in Hungary, we see it turnouts going up, in some countries going down. So there is a dissatisfaction, people's satisfaction. So yes, this is a second level elections, but I'm eager to know if you think it is still different from the first level.
Thank you very much. So from the IPC in Istanbul, we go back to Brussels, TEPSA.
Parties,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of dissatisfaction at the macro level.
I'll let them consult.
You're done. Good question. They're getting worried. You see that?
Yes. Now we're going to
I'll
start
pick it
talking among each other. Michael will repeat them all.
And you will give us each minute each for answering.
Sonia Shaban from the TEPSA Secretariat as well was very pleased in how the panel is actually unfolding and very dynamic. Also interesting to hear about your assessment on the Green Deal right now and whether the hard questions going to be asked in the coming years. I think, and also on the U.S. election. And very insightful on local situation here and so forth. For the Green Deal itself, and I guess it's also a bit of a comment in that case. We really are at the turning point, and the next 5 years will be crucial for the Green Deal because we are on timeline. And I think everyone knows we are on a timeline right now. So seeing it a bit at the bottom of politics will be probably a problem for the coming years. But beyond the Green Deal within the EU and in relation to our partners, there is also the coming US election. We know that if Trump's win, they may leave the Paris agreements again, which may have consequences on the COP, which are important for climate negotiation at the multilateral level. So I also was wondering how you see that Green Deal developing in relationship to, I guess, to the US, in relation to the US in general, whether or not it's an assessment that's on the radar right now, and if it's something that even is discussed at the moment, because it's going to be a very intense month. Yes, thank you.
Wow. So all the interventions you have, and we are still within our time limits, okay?
We will make
so relax and make it work. I think this has been a very lively debate. Now, and we are concluding and come.
You hear me? Yeah. My name is Gergely Buda, and I'm working here in this building in the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And I would like to connect a bit more to this juicy part of politics, scandals, morality. Something what Ms. Ilke mentioned is worrying and frightening facts, like getting 30% for a guy who taped his wife under the kitchen table. And like AfD having a lot of scandals and still they are winning. And I just I wanted to mention another scandal, which I also think quite frightening, actually from my hometown, Győr, in the western part of Hungary, where the former mayor, who had to resign because of the cocaine and prostitute scandal years ago, now ran again and got 25% of the votes, almost 1/3. So in general, I mean, what do you see about these scandals? Are they actually useful for the parties or not useful? I mean, getting attention. And I understand, of course, a full conference can run on this topic, but I wanted to add as a last comment.
Yes, would that be okay?
As you wish.
Okay, this is Erik. The floor is yours.
Okay, so I will try to answer and keep my time limit. Does it work? Yeah,
Yeah.
Just no light on it. Okay. Okay. And then if someone is very unsatisfied with my answer, or I missed something, I'm not answering a certain detail, you can come to me after, and I will be at your disposal. Let me start with this very last comment on juicy issues. I think from your intervention, it's quite clear that juicy issues have no political color. Okay. So I think it's important. I will add one more story. I'm living in this capital in district number 12, where which used to be a really conservative district, and voted in favor with a huge majority of a person who is proudly a drug addict and a cannabis grower. So, I mean, these juicy things can happen, and still it doesn't matter whether it's from left or right. In the name of normality and values, and yes, I am a conservative, and in the name of conservative values, I'm worried if this kind of people gain political power. So, independently of the color. From other Austrian colleagues, he just mentioned that, well, on the rule of law, there is a broad consensus. Well, what do you mean broad? I mean, in the European Parliament, there was a clear majority in favor of that kind of interpretation of rule of law, which was the interpretation. I have my own interpretation. There is no clear definition in the treaties of the rule of law. I'm in favor of rule of law. I'm in favor of Article 2, and I'm also in favor of Article 4, which is about the respect of constitutional identities. And I really would like to see a throughout European debate on rule of law which applies for both member states and European institutions. And I was very sadly sitting in my seat in the Parliament, having colleagues involved in corruption issues, sitting almost next to me or in front of me, like Eva Kaili and Mark Tarabella, against which there were clear proofs and recordings. They were just so corrupt, and they were voting on rule of law issues on certain member states. So I find this quite unsatisfactory, and not something I wish to live in Parliament, that kind of Parliament. So if I'm asked, and this is how I combine, so what are my party's priorities for this parliamentary term? One of my priorities would be that rule of law applies to everyone, including institutions and member states, and we have a very unbiased, no double standard procedure to make evaluations, because I was extremely unhappy with how the Commission has been dealing with these issues. And as it was mentioned by András, the momentum issue, the two girls, the two MEPs who got all the awards of this parliament, and the voters in this country said that if you fight against your country, that if you fight so that your country doesn't get the funds, well, you will be punished by your voters. And I always using the analog of Spain, because in Spain, neither Vox nor PP has ever, any of the members said, no, I want EU funds taken away from my country because I want to punish the Sanchez government. And I fully respected that view, because they didn't want to do anything harmful to their country. Meanwhile, in Hungary,
quite a lot in Brussels, though. How about that?
They were never asking, neither PP nor Vox, that their country do not get EU funds. They were presenting cases. They were presenting the rule of law problems in Spain with very little echo in the Commission. Some fireworks in plenary, but nothing else. But they never asked that EU money doesn't get to Spanish citizens. But is it a
It's a coffee afterwards.
Good.
Okay. There was an open
Okay.
invitation attached to the intervention.
Yeah. Maybe my answer will surprise you, but I truly believe in a strong Europe. In a strong Europe, but not necessarily strong Europe in the sense of the present left. For me, strong Europe means a strong Europe that is economic terms is strong, which means a competitive Europe. And I very much would like to see the European Union to be more competitive. Actually, originally, I wanted to go to the other panel because it has less crystal ball watching and more concrete things. I have been dealing with competitiveness issues for 5 years, and I'm extremely worried. And this outgoing parliament did a lot against Europe's competitiveness. And the Commission was listening very little to interest groups representing like think tanks, like employers organizations. We passed 5,000 pages of new legislation regulating companies. I mean, administrative burden has become unbearable. In the campaign, EPP was using these arguments. Meanwhile, they were all waiting in favor of increasing administrative burden. When the Commission comes up with proposals on which their own scrutiny body says it's harmful, and Commission still comes up with that. So I'm in favor of European defense, common defense capabilities. So I think it's very important. We have been saying that for at least 10 years. Nothing has happened. I'm very much in favor of enlargement, but it should remain a merit-based thing. Enlargement is not equal to solidarity. I would like the European Parliament to do much more for peace in the Ukrainian war. There is no question that Russia is an aggressor. There is no question who is the victim, Ukraine. But the question is how to make peace the earliest possible, that no more people die there. And I think our record as EU has been very poor on that. So I don't think we are closer to the end of this conflict than we were just a few months or 2 years ago. And I really would like to see the treaties fully respected by everyone. I don't want to see more creeping integration. I want to see member states' competencies respected, the treaties respected by all. So, yeah, I have no idea how the younger generations voted because I haven't seen any statistics and any analysis yet. And I know that my time is over. So this is what I could fit into this a bit more than 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gyuri. And you basically combined it with an open invitation to follow up with you bilaterally afterwards. And then with this, I would give now Erik 5 minutes to choose amongst the questions that we got.
All right. I'm an academic, which gives me the huge advantage that I publish a lot of stuff. And so I can just refer you to things. Fulda,
read my stuff.
Fulda, there's a piece I wrote for the Journal of Democracy on Giorgia Meloni and her victory that I think explains how she got into power and also how she's positioning herself since she got there. And one of the most surprising things about Giorgia Meloni is the extent to which she's tacked to the center. Even more surprising is how much support she's garnered from across the political spectrum. The one thing that I would say is that the terms left and right have a lot of meaning to us as people who comment on politics. They don't have a lot of meaning to voters who have become de-aligned in many respects and who float around the political spectrum looking for opportunities to express themselves and often falling into disenchantment and disappearing from politics altogether. Uwe, I think your point about citizens' participation is an important one. One of the most challenging things that we face, at least in the United States, but I would argue also in Italy, is that citizen participation that is episodic, right, that surges in and out, tends to actually be very destabilizing for the political system. And so as much as I want people to participate in democracy, it's not helpful when they participate in democracy in ways that shift political support from one institution to another. And you see this in its extreme form in these political movements that are eponymous or individual based, right? I mean, the idea that Peter Magyar recruited all of his people from the internet doesn't shock me at all, having lived with the 5-Star Movement since 2013, or studied Pim Fortuyn, or even looking at Geert Wilders. Geert Wilders is a one-man political party, and you think about it, our constitutional arrangements were not designed with that kind of political structure in mind, right? And this is what is killing our democracies, is that we have disintermediated our political parties, and our constitutional arrangements can't survive without them. And I think the point that you made about, coming back again and again and again with grand coalitions, unfortunately, that has proven to be disastrous in many respects. And I say this as someone who studied Belgian and Dutch politics and watched the Christian Democrats implode in the 1990s as a consequence, or somebody who studied Italian politics and watched the same thing. When the center returns to power repeatedly, bad things happen. And so then the question is how do we structure a political conversation? And the answer is, I don't know. And I think that's a terrifying answer for somebody who spent more than 30 years studying this. And the fact of the matter is that until we figure out an answer to that question, we are going to face these problems and facing these problems in ways that are really hard to control. So Ettore, your question was, well, what about the transmission protection instrument? Why isn't that going to work? And the answer is because there's not the political will to use it. And the instrument is designed so that the members of the governing council will deploy it on the basis of 4 debt sustainability analysis, which means that they have perfect liberty, because they're never going to get 4 that agree. They have perfect liberty to just say no, right? And if they just say no, then bad things happen. If they say yes, they have to come back and do it again in 6 weeks' time. When I talk to portfolio managers in the bond markets, they're like, woo-hoo, this is great. They can keep betting and making money every 6 weeks. And so we have set ourselves up in a kind of a disastrous situation by putting so much responsibility in the hands of unelected technocrats and not giving ourselves the ability to run political institutions in the way that they need to be run. And again, I don't know how to solve that problem now, because putting the genie back into the bottle just ain't easy. And as a consequence, we have to deal with the fact that future generations of voters are not only going to be disenchanted with politicians, but also disenchanted with the institutions that we've used to lift political issues out of the political domain, right? So our young voters are actually voting to the right. In the United States, young men vote to the right hugely, not because they are right-wing, but because the person on the right, and this gets back to the point about scandal, is someone who's so obviously out of the mainstream that they think he must be somebody who can change things, because if he can't, then who can? And this brings me to the COP question, and I'll stop with that. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, it's no longer a domestic political question. It's an international order question. And we don't have multilateral institutions to address effective climate action. We already have so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that the geothermal implications of that are unstoppable. They are going to go well beyond 2% in terms of an average increase. And what we're seeing in terms of our oceans is that the temperatures are heating up a lot faster than we anticipated and about to cause some very significant changes in the way global weather works. So unfortunately, while we're having this party on the political side, on the geothermal side, the dynamics are actually working only in one direction. And our ability to push back against it will depend a lot on our getting organized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we go to Ilke.
Thank you very much. Actually, I want to focus on 4 questions, and the first one is to push back a bit, Erik, on this extreme mainstream conversation, because this is also becoming kind of a dichotomy issue among political scientists. No, it's like either we accept extremes, or our countries will become non-governable. No, so it is becoming this conversation. And when I really care about this question, and I think there's a blurring of boundaries about mainstream and extreme. I agree on that. But for me, I go one step back. At the end of the day, European Union has always been a progressive project. I'm not using this in an ideological sense, because this is a project of integration. Cohesion policy was created so there's more progress in disadvantaged areas. This is like social security, free health, free education for all citizens, and all the other dimensions of taking away borders, uniting the currency, etc., etc. The project itself is progressive. So for me, the key question here is that what we call extreme is the ones that are basically disruptive to the project. So these ones would have been exiters in the past. Now they don't want to exit after Brexit. They want to change the project within. And for me, the key consideration, key conversation there is that what kind of policies and politics and coalitions, alliances will impact the nature of the integration project. And this is not just happening in the European Parliament. Look at the strategic agenda. The draft of the strategic agenda, I didn't read the final version, I don't have it, doesn't have references to green, doesn't have references to social Europe. So this means that the strategical identity change is not necessarily just happening at the party level, but there's also maybe more reflection on the bigger level on what kind of Europe we want. This is why I totally agree. This is a key question. We need to look for answers, but I think we cannot just say like, okay, this is what we have. The lines are blurring, so they are all great guys. The second issue is on the disconnect or gap between the citizens and Brussels elites. I have a mini survey to make. What is the most important institution in European affairs? What is it? Which institution is the most important?
Shall we vote or?
The right.
Which one? It still is Council and the European Council. It's the member states. This is still a project of 27 member states. They are the elected representatives of citizens. They bring the issues to the Brussels level. I totally think there is an issue of reflecting citizens' preferences, priorities, and policy preferences more and more in European affairs. But this Brussels elite versus citizens? European Parliament elections happen with national parties, national candidates, national campaigns. If they want to bring this on board, they have all the platforms that they can have. So I think this is something that we should be a bit more responsible. The third and fourth questions about security and defense, because I have received questions to myself. Yes, Russia is not necessarily perceived as threat by some of the extreme right-wing parties in the political spectrum, but I think this still doesn't change the fact that there is I can at least call it an absolute majority, even not a unanimity consensus over the need to spend more, to spend better, to collaborate better. Then, of course, we have national interests now that the French position is not necessarily equal to Polish position, yes. But the understanding of not just Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but this geopolitical environment, the rising power rivalry between China and the United States, the decline of multilateralism, rising of what we call global south or other powers than the West. All these changes in the geopolitical structure of the world also makes the Europeans think more about their security. And regardless of who wins in the United States, I'm sure Erik would be agreeing with me that they don't necessarily, even a Biden administration, maybe they will do the phase out a bit longer, but this doesn't change the fact that the American elites would like to quit protecting Europe. This is a reality. So both the world and the American support for European security are changing, so the Europeans are aware of that. Transatlanticist and stronger Europe. I am a transatlanticist. I want 100% stronger Europe. I think these are not mutually exclusive or a dichotomy as such. United States has been the most important ally of the Europeans and the European Union for decades. I hope they will stay that way. I hope they will play the ball. But this doesn't change the fact that the European Union should think not only in defense and security terms, but in all foreign policy, external action dimensions, including trade policy and industrial policy, has to think about its own security. And of course, we will see, again, different polls and different positions among the member states, but I more and more see consensus on stronger European pillar in NATO. And also the conversation about competitiveness is getting more and more serious. One last phrase, and I'm finishing there. Do you know how Greens will play ball a bit, in my personal opinion, with the Super Grand Coalition? Linking Green Deal to competitiveness agenda. Connecting this to citizens. Not just cheerleading about the climate change, which is extremely important. In Spain, we are burning. Here you are drowning. So this is real. But I think there is going to be more and more convergence on the competitiveness agenda, conversation about security and defense, and enlargement, EU's role in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we hand over to András, and you have to tackle the 15 remaining other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very important question on the green transition. And I would like to address that one first. I think that the green agenda may be one of the biggest victims of the next 5 years. And this is exactly a policy field where I would expect more impact from the non-mainstream right on the mainstream right, and more cooperation, more voting together, and trying to rolling back some of the existing elements of the Green Deal. A good example for this is the first interview that Manfred Weber gave, who we have mentioned quite a lot during this panel, who gave the first interview on election night, and apparently one of the first things that he has promised is that they might try to reverse the ban on cars with combustion engines in 2035. If I remember, this is the current date for that. I'm pretty sure that on green issues, on industrial issues, on economic issues, competitiveness type of issues, there will be much more cooperation between the mainstream right and the ECR group and the Identity and Democracy group than before. So what I would expect is that the majority of the Grand Coalition will still hold, but there will be a bigger impact from those party groups on the right that are not part of this mainstream coalition. Regarding the backlash on green issues, I think this is more a Western European backlash, if I may say so. The reason why I'm saying it, because the Greens lost 18 seats in the European Parliament, in Germany 9, in France 8. So if you add together the loss in France and Germany, you find 17 out of the 18 losses at the European level. So this also shows how weak the Green movement in Central and Eastern Europe is in general. It has never been strong. We lost our last Green MEP, I think, 5 years ago, and since then nothing in the last two elections. So I think this backlash that you feel in the air is a more Western European phenomenon, and I don't face it as strongly as you do. But it's true that in Western Europe, certainly the mood has changed around green issues. And the best example for this is that 5 years ago, climate activists were marching on the streets with Greta Thunberg. And now it's farmers protesting on the streets this year. And this mood is reflected, I think, in the change of priorities, especially of the European People's Party. So the change you should not expect from the Green Party or the Liberals or the SD, but this change of mood, I think, has a much bigger impact on the EPP. There were a few questions on Hungary, for example, on the young vote. Of course, only 3 days have passed since the election, so we don't have new data since then. But we have data from before the elections. And what I can tell you is that Fidesz, in the last 10 years, has changed its voter base to such an extent that it became overrepresented among older people, among rural people, and among lower educated people. This is the trend of the last 10 years. And the opposition became overrepresented among young people, among more urban people, and higher educated people. The problem from an electoral perspective for the opposition in Hungary is that there are more rural people than urban people, there are more lower educated people than higher educated people, and there are more active older people than young people. So Fidesz has been on the good side of the demography until now. But what is certain is that until now, the young vote has increasingly started to support the opposition. And I think that with this phenomenon of this political newcomer it may be just even stronger than that. Always the anti-establishment parties have been doing very well with the Hungarian youngsters. For example, Momentum, the young liberals who just fell out of the European Parliament, were pretty much a generational party for young urban liberals. There is still a satirical party, a joke party, which is called the Two-Tailed Dog Party, who, by the way, won that district in Budapest that MEP Győri referred to as the drug addict and so on. So they are the Two-Tailed Dog Party, and they were also very very strong among the youngsters until Péter Magyar and the TISZA party came. So I think that Péter Magyar and the TISZA party just destroyed everybody, even among the youngsters, in this respect. Regarding how much ideologies, I know. Okay, 1 minute. How much and I will close with this one. How much ideologies matter in elections? I think in the Hungarian example we see a very good example that this time it didn't matter at all. The only thing that mattered is who shows some potential strength against the regime. So who can opposition voters trust to mount a serious challenge to the Orbán regime? I think this was the only question. And the disappointment with the failed opposition has been so big that they were willing to vote for a guy who claims to be very close to what Fidesz stands for, by the way, on many issues, especially on Europe. As Péter Magyar has already said, that he is against of any kind of federalist approaches, that he is on the side of Europe of nation states. You could hear the standard Fidesz text from his mouth as well when he speaks about the European Union. So in the end, we will end up in a situation, I think, in the Hungarian context, that left-wing, liberal and green voters in Hungary will strengthen the European right. Because the European People's Party will get an extra 7 seats, mostly with voters who previously voted for SND parties, Renew parties, and Green parties.
Thank you very much. With this, we are closing the panel on the European elections and its implications. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed the panel very much. And thank you for having accepted the invitation to our panel.